Let's start with homelessness and how bad a problem it is. And you take a hard look at San Francisco, which is, I've never heard that before. It's kind of clever. Under then Mayor Gavin Newsom, now their governor, who just survived the recall effort. But and a lot of people believe he's got his sights on higher office. So all of this is relevant to our national politics as well. Talk about what's happened in San Francisco. It used to be one of our greatest cities. Everybody wanted to go there and visit it. Now it's like, you're going to San Francisco? You're going to go move to San Francisco? Because among other things, crime and homelessness is going to be right in your face.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the most interesting things I discovered early on in my research process that in the early 90s, there were three major books, all by liberals or progressives, all that were well received and well reviewed by the major newspapers, which all identified homelessness as a problem of addiction and also a more technical word, disaffiliation. But the basic picture is, people get addicted to hard drugs for a variety of reasons. Some of them have underlying mental health issues. Other people, they just succumb to addiction. They no longer work because they spend their days using hard drugs. If you're addicted to heroin or increasingly fentanyl, which is 50 times more potent than heroin, you're using drugs every 4 hours during the day. You're not working. You're couch surfing friends and family until you basically steal from them usually or borrow money and they kick you out. So you're disaffiliated from friends and family. That's how you end up on the street. The word homeless is really a propaganda word designed to trick your brain into thinking that this is a problem of poverty. And progressives have done a real disservice to people suffering from addiction by misdescribing them as people that are somehow suffering from high rents. I found exactly 0 people living on the street who were on the street because they just couldn't afford the rent. If you can't afford the rent, you just move out of state, as hundreds of thousands of people have done in California. You move in with friends and family. If you're the proverbial mother escaping an abusive husband, we have good solutions for that person. We do a good job taking care of that person. The people living on the street are suffering from severe addiction. When you ask social service workers how many of the people, they say things like 100%. Like they don't encounter people that are on the street there. You wouldn't. It's just too dangerous. Women are raped. There's all sorts of violence. The drug dealers enforce the laws of the street with machetes. So it's an out of control situation. Gavin Newsom helped create it. When he was mayor, he put in place what was called a housing first policy, which basically gives housing without anything asked in return. It's the opposite of what they do in liberal cities in Europe. I discovered when I went to Amsterdam, I interviewed the head of drug policy in Portugal. They arrest addicts who break the law in public. And to get your own private apartment, your own room, you have to earn it through sobriety and abstinence. So really, Europe has done the opposite of what we've done in the United States. What we're doing is not something that any other civilized or developed nation has done. It's really victimology on steroids. That's what's led to the chaos on the streets.
This is really, I've lived in New York for almost 2 decades up until recently. And this is why we constantly, we see homeless people, with the cop. They get the sad dog in front of them. So to be extra sympathetic. And my kids would always ask, should we put money in the cup? And I always said, that's not how we're going to help them. We're going to make donations to organizations that have a different mission in mind, because I was aware of the tie between homelessness and addiction. And the last thing I want my kid to do is give an addict $20 so that they can go get another hit. There are organizations that will actually help them into a shelter where ideally they will get some drug treatment too. But you write in the book that the difference between shelters and public housing is important. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, absolutely. And by the way, giving addicts cash is actually, I think it's unethical because it's actually now killing people. The cost of drugs has declined so much, Megyn. It's shocking. It costs, basically, you can be using hard drugs, meth and fentanyl and heroin for $10 a day now in San Francisco. It's just mind blowing. In the 1980s, homelessness was mostly a problem of crack and alcohol. But now that hard drugs have become so much cheaper, the dominant drugs are meth and fentanyl. And that's why so many people are dying. But yeah, we know how to deal with this issue. It's the same basically in every civilized and developed city in the world. You shelter 100% of the people on the street. This is not optional. There's no right to sleep in parks or on park benches. You must sleep in a shelter. At the shelter, you will be evaluated. If you have a psychiatric illness, then you can get a psych bed at a hospital. If you or somebody that just needs to be on your feet and you just need a little bit of help, they can help with that. But if you want your own apartment room, which is what really most people want, what I saw at work in Amsterdam when I shadowed social workers was that that was a carrot that you offered to somebody in exchange for them following through on their personal plan, which almost always was included sobriety and abstinence. And so it was a reward, as opposed to what we do in California, which is that it's something that the radical left, really, the progressive movement, has decided is somehow a right. You hear it a lot. Housing's a right. You can't possibly provide housing for everybody who demands their own apartment at a cost of $750,000 to $1 million per apartment unit in the Bay Area. It's ridiculous. New York actually, up until COVID in recent years, had done better than the Bay Area. They actually built sufficient shelter for all of their homeless people, and then they also similarly had made housing more of a reward. But it's not that complicated in that sense. Yes, it's true that people on the street have different problems, but really there has to be a requirement that everybody be in shelter. Otherwise, you just end up with chaos in the streets. You end up with violence, and you end up with people hurting each other.